It was a thrilling, wet-dry, knife-edge, all-action, 70-lap scrap. The Canadian Grand Prix was the race of the season so far.
When he got the lead, did you really think this man would throw it away? For the 60th time in Formula One, Max Verstappen takes the win. Lando Norris is second, and it's George Russell across the line to complete the podium.
Oh, nice. I enjoyed that one.
Verstappen won it, but how close were Lando Norris and George Russell? Welcome to F1 Nation with me, Tom Clarkson, and Sky Sports F1 presenter Natalie Pinkham. So let's review, recap, and relive a special weekend in Montreal. Pinks, how are you? And how would you sum up that race?
Well, I'm really well, thank you. And I think it's a bit of a bold statement saying it was the best race of the season so far. But when I think about it, you're probably right. Kept me on the edge of my seat. I loved the variable of the weather, this drying line on the track that you thought, any one tyre could just tiptoe its way off that and there could be big consequences. And actually we saw that, right at the end with Carlos Sainz, a fairly innocuous spin took two of them out of the race. So you always felt that there was some drama just about to happen at any moment.
Yeah, it's an old school track that always throws up a bit of jeopardy, and the weather was rubbish all weekend. It's got to be said. It was sort of, I don't know, at one point we had hail.
I saw the hailstones.
Yeah, hailstones the size of golf balls. It was ridiculous. But look, Pinks, let's break it down. Let's look at the key moments that defined the Grand Prix and why Verstappen came out on top and where Lando Norris and George Russell missed out. First, though, let's hear from the top two, Verstappen and Norris.
It's very rewarding. I mean, it's never an easy race. It's easy to make mistakes, especially on the inters when they were almost becoming slicks. It was very easy to go off. Because the track was drying in most places, but in some corners it was still a bit too wet to go to slick tires. And yeah, that made it just very, very difficult. But it's a lot of fun to drive these kind of races now and then. You don't want it all the time because that's too stressful, but I had a lot of fun out there today.
As you say, it was stressful. There was a lot going on, but how calm was it inside the cockpit?
I think, of course, you are very focused, but you try to remain as calm as you can be, and also the communication to the pit wall and them to you to ask, what are the conditions. And I definitely think as a team, we did make the right calls today. That, of course, is also very important.
You made the right calls, but I think the timing of the safety car helped as well. Do you see that as payback for Miami?
Of course, it sometimes works for you and sometimes it works against you. So this time, it was working for us. So I guess in that sense, it's 1-1 now this year. But that's racing. It's a part of it as well.
We should have won the race today and we didn't. So frustrating. We had the pace, probably not in the dry at the end. Turned out it didn't really matter too much, but we should have won today. Simple as that. We didn't do a good enough job as a team to box when we should have done and not get stuck behind the safety car. So I don't think it was a luck or unluck kind of or unlucky kind of thing. I don't think it was the same as Miami. This was just making a wrong call. So it's on me and it's on the team and it's something we'll discuss after, but we should have won today. I think we're at a level now where we're not satisfied with a second. Like the target is to win and we didn't do that. So frustrating, but a tough race and still to end up in second when it could always finish and could be worse. It's still a good result.
When you analyse this race, what hurt you more, the timing of the first safety car or staying out too long on the intermediate tyre?
No, staying out on the intermediate helped me. It helped me have a chance against George, so I overcut him. I didn't do a good enough job afterwards, and he was clearly way quicker than us in the dry and even on the hard tires. So that was completely the right call and a good decision from us to stay out. It gained me a lot of lap time, and it's not the timing of the first safety car. I had enough time to box, and we didn't box. So this was a mistake on us as a team, and just something we didn't do a good enough job with.
Well, that's really interesting, TC, because I think Lando kind of changed his tune when reflecting on the race. Initially, he said, good luck, bad luck, you get the rub of the green with the safety car. He didn't get it this time round, but he got it in Miami. Well, actually, later, he reflects on the fact that it was both his and the team's fault for not responding sooner. I'm really interested by this because it clearly could have got in time, but the argument was, I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the team may not have been ready Why not?
I think that is what they're going to be analysing now, because Max talks about, the Inters being like slick tyres, and that was the case at that stage of the race. The safety cars come out, it's lap 25, the track's pretty dry. Remember, you saw them going offline, searching for wet bits of the track. But as soon as Logan Sargent became beached on the racing line, there was going to be a safety car. And actually, McLaren heard about the safety car while Lando was still on that straight going down towards the pits. So he could have come in, as he rightly says. He didn't. The people behind him did. And that was the crucial moment in the Grand Prix. And I think you could argue that Red Bull are used to winning. They're used to being at the sharp end. They're a very nimble racing team. They get those sort of calls right time and time again. McLaren are still on that journey back, aren't they? And so suddenly
interesting.
That pressure situation to make the call, to be the first person to make the call as well, it's a new experience for a lot of the people there, and I think it showed yesterday.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? Because it's about reacting and responding in the moment. And as you say, you can only really get that with experience right at the sharp end. You can't train for that. It's like it happens, and muscle memory from previous experiences kicks in.
Well, you're talking about experience, all right? Max clearly enjoyed that Grand Prix. Just listen to what he was saying. But, there was a stage early in the Grand Prix when Lando overtook Max. And I'm sure the Max Verstappen of not that long ago would have fought really hard to keep him behind, but he was looking at the long game. He knew the conditions were going to change. We all knew, everyone at the track knew that there was more rain in the forecast. And I think in the wet conditions, the Red Bull was extremely quick. It actually was really interesting, Pinks, how different cars were quick at different stages in the Grand Prix. I felt the Red Bull was quickest in the wet conditions. When it was just starting to dry out, suddenly the McLaren came alive. Just look at some of those lap times that Norris was able to do just as the dry line was appearing. And then at the end of the Grand Prix, in the dry conditions, George Russell was on a mission on those medium tyres. So we had 3 different cars fastest at different stages of that Grand Prix, and Max was able to read that situation, not react to Norris overtaking him, look at the big picture, and the best driver in the best team won that Grand Prix, even if it wasn't the best car.
Interesting, because I think you can extend that point to cover off Russell as well, in the sense that he clearly is a hugely talented driver, but he hasn't had enough experience right at the front to hone those skills when it matters most. And he's still made a few little but costly mistakes. And no doubt he'll iron those out because he's got the talent to do so. It's just great to see him actually in a really quick car at the front again. This is what he's been waiting for. This is what he's been so patiently waiting for all these years. A decent car with his experience is coming together, and hopefully they'll be able to reap the rewards of that.
Hear that? That's the sound of a new sale on Shopify. And if you're an entrepreneur, then you need them in your corner, because Shopify is the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your business. And it's already revolutionizing millions of businesses worldwide, thanks to its simplistic approach to online and in-person selling. It's got all of your sales channels covered, from a shopfront-ready POS system to its all-in-one e-commerce platform, and it even helps you start selling across social media marketplaces like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Shopify knows that every business is different. It doesn't matter if you're selling printed t-shirts or personalized keepsakes. Its industry-leading tools are designed to give you complete control over your brand. You can customize your online shop to suit your style, connect with new customers, and drive growth, and even maintain the relationships to keep them coming back. And most importantly, it helps build your confidence to take your business to the next level. It's incredibly empowering for entrepreneurs, no matter where you are on your journey. Shopify is on hand to support your success every step of the way, with its award-winning help and extensive business course library. It's time to get serious about selling and get Shopify today. This is Possibility powered by Shopify. Sign up for a £1 per month trial period at shopify.co.uk/nation, all lowercase. Go to shopify.co.uk/nation to take your business to the next level today. Shopify.co.uk/nation. Well, why don't we talk about George Russell now and hear how he assessed his race and why he couldn't convert his second pole position into a victory.
I think if you told us ahead of this weekend pole position and P3, we may not have believed you, to be honest. But as Max said, it was such a tricky race out there for everybody. You put a millimetre wide and you're off. And I think for me, it was just one too many mistakes at key moments that cost us a shot of fighting with these two towards the end of the race.
The car seemed extremely quick in all conditions. Just talk us through the decision to give up track position to Piastri when you made that final stop.
I was pushing to pit because I thought the new medium would have been really competitive at the end. I need to look at it because, to be honest, in hindsight, I think we had really great pace. Those guys were on the medium, and me being in the hard, I think we'd have probably been in a really strong position to fight. But, you know, there's a lot of changes you have made if you know how things plan out in retrospectively. But, you know, I'm happy with the progress we've made. Really proud of the team because we've been pushing these upgrades through, and it's really paying dividends.
Happy with the progress, proud of the team. Can we say Mercedes are back?
I think Red Bull have had, it's no secret they've struggled a bit with their car these last 3 races. So I think we need to see how their performance turns out in Barcelona, which is a little bit more of a conventional circuit. But this pace increase that we've seen from us this weekend, it hasn't been a surprise to us because all the numbers back at the factory told us we're going to be finding a big chunk of performance with these upgrades. So Barcelona is going to be interesting for everybody, but I'm confident we can win the fight.
When George first got out of the car after the race, he was very self-critical, Pinks. That was his first reaction, is that I made mistakes. I could have done a better job. I find that interesting, whereas, you know, Lando's first reaction was, yeah, okay, we did well. I finished, you know, with Max just in front of me. Good weekend. I always think George is too critical of his own performances. Of course, you have to be critical in order to improve. I would keep them to myself rather than be quite so public.
I mean, it's very endearing, actually, when someone's critical of themselves, because you think, you know, the first person you need to look at is yourself in the mirror. Charles does it as well, doesn't he? But I think you're probably also right, because you need to almost curate an image of yourself that you want others to buy into. Now, if you're the first person to publicly say it was my fault, then a few months down the line, we might not even remember what happened, but we'll say, yeah, but wasn't it George's fault? Now, we might not think that if he hadn't brought it up. And I think, look, always be positive and constructive, but you've also got to, you know, own it as well. And actually, I really loved it when Kevin Magnussen owned it in Miami, when he said, actually, no, I deserve those penalties. It was so refreshing because so many drivers try to blame each other. And, you know, but perhaps that's just part of his personality. I do think it's a pretty endearing trait. But yeah, ultimately, he wants to sort of carve out a really positive brand of his racing, and you want everyone else to then buy into it. Don't dupe us, but be confident with your assertions about how you're able to drive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think part of his reaction came down to the fact that he's got a really competitive car underneath him now, and he knows all of the hard work that's gone in back at the factory in Brackley.
And he knows he was on pole. You know, this was his greatest chance of winning this season. And, you know, what a turnaround that would be given the start of the year they've had. So he would have been really frustrated, and he probably just needs to have hold a bit more back when the microphones go straight under his nose. I mean, I shouldn't be saying that because I love to get the raw, real reaction from all the drivers initially. You don't want that sort of PR speak. You want to hear how they really feel. But yeah, I suppose if I was managing him, I'd probably say just try and hold that back a bit more initially, and we'll go through it in the team debrief later.
Now, he was a bit circumspect at the end of what we heard from him just then about Mercedes' chances going forward. It'll be interesting to go to Barcelona, he says, to see, you know, the lay of the land. But there is absolutely no doubt that Mercedes have taken a massive step in the last 2 races, isn't it? It's since that there's no one element, of course, James Allison, technical director, will tell you, there's no one element that makes the car better, but there's no doubt that new front wing that George ran in Monaco, both drivers had it in Montreal, has been the silver bullet.
Silver bullet for the silver arrow.
And there's no doubt, right, that it's all about the flexi front wing. Obviously, staying within the regulations. There's a load that the front wing has to carry, and it's not allowed to flex more than a certain amount with that load on it. As long as it passes that test, it can do whatever it wants beyond that. And obviously, Red Bull nailed that very early on in these regulations. I think another team nailed that from Austria onwards last year, and Mercedes have nailed it now. And so it's been a bit of a eureka moment for them to get that front wing on the car. And after qualifying on Saturday, when he took that pole position, he said the performance has zigzagged so far this year as they've been trying to find solutions, but they've now found it. And I think it's really exciting going forward for Formula One. I think, just look, him and Max Verstappen set an identical lap time in qualifying. That hasn't happened since 1997. Formula One is really, really competitive now. And okay, who's going to win Barcelona? Probably Red Bull are going to be a bit stronger there. But, McLaren are so good now. Mercedes are coming on strong. And it was just confirmation what we saw from Mercedes in Montreal, that I think they are back. They're not yet on the level, I think, on a high-speed track of Red Bull, but they're certainly back and going to be contenders every weekend.
Well, Barcelona will be so revealing because it's a track that's got a bit of everything. And I think you're right. This is so exciting for the fans because potentially, as you say, there could be 8 cars in it. 8 cars fighting for pole and indeed, therefore, the victory. I mean, it's crazy. We'll come on to Ferrari in a minute, but it's crazy to think we were waxing lyrical about Charles Leclerc only at the last race, and now he's not the talk of the town. They say a week's a long time in politics, even longer in Formula One. Yeah. It's brilliant though for the fans. It's wide open
with very, very small change in the trajectory of the race. I think any one of those 3 drivers, the top 3, could have won it. If Lando had reacted to the safety car and come in when everyone else came in, I think he would have won that race. Funnily enough, I think George is actually the one who's probably least likely to win that race, just with the performance characteristics of that Mercedes. But still, it was so close. So close. I can't think of a closer weekend for qualifying race that I've attended in a long time. The other thing I noticed, Pinks, actually, is how when Max was dominating everything, I always slightly felt the other drivers were like, oh, well, Max is going to get past me. And they sort of would slightly see his helmet coming and led him through.
Self-fulfilling prophecy. They're like, we're never going to overtake. Yeah.
It was the Senna effect that we had 30 years ago. Whenever drivers saw Senna coming, they would sort of throw in the towel. And I'm not saying anyone threw in the towel, but now I feel the drivers are thinking, no, we can compete with this guy. And the feeling in the pit lane is different. The determination of, the Landos, the Oscars, the Georges, the Lewises is different. And actually, I mentioned Lewis Hamilton. We came into the weekend. He was buoyed by knowing that he was going to have this front wing on his car, which he hadn't run in Monaco. He actually told the team in Monaco, please give it to George. But I think he was buoyed. He was very quick in practice. It slipped away from him in qualifying. And then actually he said after the race that he didn't drive a great race. He was just disappointed. And of course, George overtook him on the medium tyre at the end.
Well, he actually said it was one of his worst races for a very long time, which again, talk about self-chastisement and the blame game. Again, very publicly shouldering the responsibility of that. I mean, was it that bad a race?
Well, no, but wasn't that partly because George had overtaken him and he wanted to get the message out that, George, you only overtake me when I'm having a really rubbish race, is how I read that.
Oh, come on, but I don't know. I think you're taking too deep a dive on the psychology of it there. Like, ultimately, whatever he says, people are going to spin it, aren't they? And say, oh, well, 1 minute you're blaming the upgrades, the next you're blaming the team, and now, no, he's blaming himself. Like, here's a good guy holding his hand up and saying, I wasn't good enough today. I thought that was amazing to hear. This is a man that doesn't have anything to prove to anyone, and yet he was still prepared to own it in that moment.
He doesn't have anything to prove, yet on Saturday after qualifying, he was saying, I don't understand why the performance on my car drops away in qualifying. 2 weeks earlier in Monaco, that same guy had been saying, I don't think I'm going to out-qualify George Russell this year.
I feel for these drivers. They can't say anything without being dissected by all of us. I mean, maybe it's just a throwaway statement. Anyway, look, I mean, if your worst race is coming forth, then things are improving at Mercedes. I think this is a great moment to say today's the day. We're recording this podcast on Monday, 17 years to the day after Lewis Hamilton won his first Formula One race, which of course was in Canada. Well, as we've mentioned, it was a disastrous weekend for Ferrari, a double DNF for them. After the highs of Charles Leclerc's historic home race victory at the Monaco Grand Prix, they certainly had a weekend to forget in Montreal because neither of them made it to Q3 and finished in the points for the first time this season. And both of them were out of the race. They didn't even see the checkered flag. Well, it means that Charles Leclerc has lost ground to Max Verstappen in the driver's standings, whilst Ferrari have fallen further behind Red Bull in the constructors, and McLaren have crucially closed in on them. They did have high expectations coming into the weekend, so why did they struggle so much in Canada?
Well, I don't think they know is the crux of it, because in Friday practice, the long runs of Charles Leclerc in particular were actually quite good. They looked pretty sharp, so it all just fell away when it mattered. Actually, dare I say, it was the sort of trajectory that we've seen Mercedes on so often this year. Very often they've been quick on a Friday, and then at the business end of the weekend, it's dropped away. And that's the sort of weekend that Ferrari had in Montreal. We talk about power unit characteristics, and one of the reasons that car was so competitive in Monaco is the initial launch out of slow corners. That's where the Ferrari PU is so good. And Montreal is all about chicanes, exiting slow corners. So I think we all went there thinking, can Charles maintain that run of form from Monaco? Yet it fell away, and they don't know yet. They will be analysing it as we speak, Pinks. I mean, and also for Carlos to crash into any car, the one he didn't want to crash into was Alex Albon, with all the chat about him maybe going to Williams next year. But yeah, what a difficult weekend.
It was so strange because it was one of those weird little mistakes that just didn't need to happen, but it had disastrous consequences that weren't really commensurate to the mistake that was made, if that makes sense. Like, it was just seemed to be fairly innocuous, but it took both of them out. And yeah, what a shame actually also for Alex Albon, because he was on for some points. Another terrible weekend for Williams with both of their drivers DNFing as well.
And then there was the power unit issue as well for Charles in the race. He was 80 horsepower down almost from the get-go.
But then he seemed to fix it quite quickly, didn't he? A bit of a Control-Alt-Delete in the pits.
They were holding out, I think, for a red flag, hoping that, something would happen that would create a red flag situation. Then they could have fixed it, but of course there wasn't one, so they had just had to do a long pit stop. It was, just scrappy. It was just scrappy and disappointing. And, Fred Vasseur said after the race, let's hope we've had all of our bad luck for the rest of the season in this one weekend. And if they are going to challenge, 2 weeks ago we were saying they're going to challenge Red Bull for the Constructors' Championship. If they're going to do that, it's about clean weekends and maximising every situation. Because let's not forget, Red Bull had power unit issues in practice. They had a car that wouldn't go over the curbs. And the reason the Red Bull was so good in the wet part of the race is because you don't go near the curbs in the wet. So that's why Max was one of the reasons why Max was so good at that segment of the race. They just maximised every situation, and Ferrari have to start doing that. Let's talk about Daniel Ricciardo now, who's finally scored Grand Prix points for the first time this season after finishing P8 in Montreal, having qualified 5th. Now, Pinks, he came in for a bit of criticism from former world champion Jacques Villeneuve on Friday of the race weekend. And I don't know whether it was a source of motivation for Daniel, but I would say that was a really strong weekend for him. Certainly his strongest weekend since he's come back to Formula One in the middle of last year. And I would say the Daniel of old. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Jacques is completely entitled to his opinion. I think it was somewhat oversimplistic summary of Daniel's career. To say he's been 5 years in the sport and struggling throughout isn't true, because he lost his seat at McLaren due to poor performance, and then he earned it back through AlphaTauri, only to break his hand and earn his way back in again. So look, as I say, Jacques is entitled to his opinion, but it was great to see Daniel come back and quieten his critics in the best possible way, which is on the track. And that quali was fantastic. It was disappointing to see both him and Yuki lose places at the start. There was obviously some issue there.
Again, they lost places at the start in Imola as well. There is clearly a start issue.
Yeah, but ironic that he would then get a penalty for jumping the start and potentially gaining an advantage for doing so, which, I think still baffles him and pundits around the sport, because I don't know, did you see any movement? I thought that potentially the wheel moved slightly but didn't come out of his box to gain an advantage. So anyway, he served the penalty and he was still able to bring it home P8, partly because he benefited from Albon and Carlos Sainz coming together. But on the whole, I think, look, Canada is a racetrack that suits him well. He obviously got his first Grand Prix win there, and so it holds great memories for him. And I don't think that there's a driver on the grid that doesn't relish going back to places where they perform well. You get a psychological boost from that. But it's great to see him qualifying well and driving well. It was a shame not to see Yuki in the points as well, because bar that spin that he had at the end there, he would have been. But yeah, good to see Daniel back, hushing those critics. Long may it continue.
Well, and it came off one of his more difficult weekends in Monaco, where he was disappointed. He says, I love Monaco, and I was disappointed with the way that played out. And he said, I had a quiet word with myself after the race about how to arrive in a better place psychologically going into a Grand Prix weekend. It's all about not wasting energy and being, so that on Sunday, that so much is required of these drivers on and off track from the moment they arrive on a Thursday, that if you're not careful, you're exhausted by the time lights go out on Sunday afternoon. And it's about managing the workload so that actually you're at your best, you're at your peak for those 70 laps on a Sunday afternoon. And I think he probably felt Monaco hadn't been optimal in that way, and he's made changes, and look at the effect it's had. And as you say, this is a Daniel Ricciardo track, Montreal, right? He's last of the late breakers. That's why he's such an effective overtaker. And it's all about the brakes in Montreal. It's high speed to low speed on numerous times around the lap. It is a Daniel Ricciardo track. And as you say, he's gone back to a place he's had success. He likes it. And I think that is worth a couple of tenths in your back pocket. They will claim not, but I do think that's the case.
I totally agree, and we can't ever begin to imagine what it's like to be a Grand Prix racer or winner, but a similar principle is applied to broadcasting, and Billy McGinty, our boss at Sky, always says, just build up to Sunday. If you go all out in practice and you're exhausted and you give it your all too soon, you don't necessarily save your performance for when it really matters, which is on race day. And it's the same principle can be applied to racing, can't it? It's a gradual momentum that you take into the weekend and build on.
You could say that about the Combox as well, right? Jacques Villeneuve went hard on Friday. I don't know what he had left after that. But Pinks, answer this question, okay? You know Daniel very well. One comment that Villeneuve did say is, why is Daniel still in Formula One? That one comment did make me think, okay, so why is someone like Daniel still in Formula One? He's got more than 200 races under his belt. He's won 8 of them. He's got nothing to prove. He doesn't need to work again. Financially, him and his family are secure. He's not in a front-running car.
Okay, but I think you're asking the question, why is Daniel, from Daniel's perspective, still in the sport? Whereas I think Jacques Villeneuve was asking, why is he in it? Because he doesn't warrant a seat. I think they're two different questions. So, but you're flipping the question now, are you? Oh, yes. Interesting. See what you've done there.
Why do you think he is still in Formula One? Knowing he goes into a race weekend knowing he can't win it, he's got nothing to prove? Or is it all about getting that Red Bull seat? And was Checo Perez's announcement of staying there in the build-up to Montreal a really difficult moment for Daniel? But is that why he's still doing it and he's just had that door slammed in his face?
Look, I don't know. I can't speak for Daniel, but I suppose let's ask you the same question. Why do you still work in Formula One? You love it. I mean, it's the pinnacle of motorsport for most of us. It's the ultimate. And I think he had a bit of time away from the sport and probably missed it a huge amount and was ready to come back and test himself at the highest level. So, and look, I was quite surprised that they re-signed Perez for 2 years and announced that as quickly as they did. It works for Max. Perhaps there's stuff going on behind the scenes. And Sergio is no doubt a great racer.
He wasn't in Montreal.
Well, he wasn't. He wasn't, was he? And actually, that's a bit of a shame, because you'd think that the confidence boost signing a new contract would give him would just relax. Because I think Checo, like most drivers, is at their best when they're relaxed and they haven't got anything to worry about. They just do what comes naturally. But look, if Daniel puts in regularly strong performances and Checo doesn't, then are these contracts worth the paper they're written on anyway? I mean, I doubt it. They would find a way. But equally, it's no great surprise that Daniel hasn't been promoted back into the team. By his own admission, he hasn't had a great start to the season. But, Miami sprint and Montreal quali, and then indeed the race, because it wasn't an easy race, is proof that he hasn't lost any of his talent.
And we will be watching Perez's progress closely, won't we? The last 3 races have been very difficult for him. Imola, Monaco, Montreal. But that does coincide with the Red Bull's least competitive performances of the year. When that car becomes hard to drive, the gap between Checo and Max grows. And I think when we go back to somewhere like Barcelona in 2 weeks' time, the car will be better there and Checo will be closer.
Yeah, good
And if
point.
he's not,
that will be interesting to see.
That's when
really
the
telling.
questions will need to be asked.
Good point, TC. Well, let's move it on to Alpine now, and they scored points with both drivers for the first time this year. Pierre Gasly coming home P9, Esteban Ocon P10. And this was the team's first race since the announcement that Esteban Ocon will leave the team at the end of the season. Now, despite such a positive result, Ocon was not happy with the team orders for him to let Gasly through in an attempt to catch Ricciardo. Let's have a listen then to Esteban's comments after the race.
Not the happiest, to be honest. Obviously, we started last and got into the points with both cars, which is amazing for the team. But, I did my part of the job. Being a team player, being the nice guy. But too nice, I am. But, I had to let Pierre go at the end, which I've done. I've always followed the instructions that I've been given. But for no reason, really, because, we were not going to catch Daniel. That was the reason for the call. And obviously, I'm losing a point there. Being too nice is not the right attitude to have in Formula One. But I show that I'm a team player, and that's what matters.
He thinks he's been too nice. Yeah, I think shots have been fired there.
And I feel like this could be the first of many similar situations, don't you?
I mean, hey, it was a very difficult weekend for Esteban. 2 very difficult weekends, of course. The accident with Pierre in Monaco, the harsh conversations that he had with the team immediately afterwards, the news coming into Montreal that he's no longer going to stay with the team. So it was difficult. There's no doubt about it. And then the car was not that great in the dry over 1 lap. So he's on the back foot going into that Grand Prix. He then had some mechanical issues on the grid. And I just remember walking past his car. It was surrounded by mechanics. And, there was a lot of question marks as to whether he was going to even start the Grand Prix. So given all of that, he had a brilliant race. But I just think when he says, I'm too nice, I think it's almost that's a marker in the sand is I'm not going to do it again.
I think you're right. And I also think once the dust has settled, he'll hopefully reflect on just how well he did on Sunday. You've got to remember that he's trying to sell himself now to other teams to secure his Formula One future. I find it so interesting. The likes of Lewis, the likes of Esteban, when you're leaving a team, Carlos Sainz, how the mindset shifts and how perhaps a little bit of paranoia creeps in. You don't know who your real mates are within the team, how they respond to you, the dynamic changes with your teammate, the sharing of information changes. I mean, look at Adrian Newey. He's basically being alienated from within. Once you make that announcement, everything changes. And then it's how you manage the situation. And Bruno Famin has got a job on his hands to manage his 2 drivers. And, we've got a number of races to go.
You're right. And I think it looks like Gasly's going to stay there. So the team is going to include him in all the technical conversations. They're going to exclude Ocon from all of those conversations because they don't want to share any secrets going forward. I thought it was interesting that you mentioned Carlos Sainz. I would say of all the drivers leaving teams at the end of this year, Carlos is the one who is still working best within his current team. Yes, I mean, the paranoia from Lewis, we've seen it over the last few races, particularly about his qualifying performances. We're now seeing it from Ocon.
It must be so hard because you want to use your platform to carve out your future. It's about using the voice that you've got. But Carlos is proving that you can do that behind closed doors, because he won't be altogether happy with the way things are going. And to know that he's been rejected by the team and still be loyally working for them and not disclosing anything in the public forum, I think that takes a hell of a character to be able to achieve that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Ocon is sure in the knowledge that he's going to be on the grid next year. It's just a question of where. So in terms of whether he finishes 9th, whether he finishes 10th, I don't think that's going to make any difference to whether Andreas Seidl at Audi signs him should Carlos Sainz not go there. Equally, whether Ayo Komatsu at Haas signs him. It's going to be difficult. And the problem is, with all these teams, of course, your teammate's car is the one closest in performance to yours. So we're going to see Ocon and Gasly tripping over each other the whole time, because they're going to be next to each other on the grid.
Constantly sharing tarmac. And the interesting thing, as you say, that didn't impact Alpine's weekend. You know, had they switched them around, they'd have had the same amount of points. And it was crucial, really important points for the team. So is it about ego? Is it about one-upmanship? I don't know. But I think Esteban was clearly trying to make the point that I did what I thought was best for the team. And actually, that wasn't reciprocated. But I don't think that comes as any great surprise if Pierre is the chosen one, the golden boy who's staying. It's hard because Esteban is such a nice guy. Genuinely, I said to him when we did an interview in Monaco, you're one of the few that is always so incredibly polite in the pen. He genuinely is a joy to talk to. Even when he's had a terrible race, he's so polite. But, you know, I think some argue that when the visor comes down, he's not altogether polite on the track.
Yeah, well, proof. But as I said earlier, it looks like he is going to be on the grid. Carlos Sainz remains the key domino that we're waiting to fall, because everything will then become pretty clear after that. Of course, Yuki Tsunoda is staying at VCARB. We learnt that in Canada. So in terms of the driver market, and of course Perez is staying now at Red Bull, it's still all about Carlos Sainz. Williams trying so hard to get him. And it was interesting to hear James Vowles, team principal of Williams, pinpointing a moment in China earlier this year when, I don't know if you remember, Pinks, when Carlos had an accident coming out of the last corner on the start-finish straight. Quite a big crash, but then immediately went straight out and went faster than his very highly rated teammate Charles Leclerc. And that was a moment that James Vowles pointed out and just said that is the sign of a guy who's very level in his head, knows exactly what he wants, and I want a bit of that in my racing team. Now, if you were managing Sainz and it was a choice of Audi or Williams...
I quite like this sort of romantic notion of going back to make Williams great again. I really like the idea of Carlos and Alex partnering up, because I think they'll work really well together. I mean, it's a tough one, isn't it? A tough call to make. How much of it goes on relationships? You know, James Vowles has obviously worked with some incredible drivers at Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton being one of them, and he's an astute guy. I think perhaps that's a big draw for Carlos, knowing about James's big intentions and ambitions for the team. And I believe him. I buy into his dream, his long-term goal for Williams. But then, you know, Audi's the same. Andreas Seidl is a great guy. They obviously worked together at McLaren, didn't they? And they, I gather, got on very well there. So, what do you think?
Well, I think I would nudge him in the direction of Williams, because I think there is still quite a lot up in the air with regard to the 2026 regulations. And I think for an Audi team coming in, who are particularly with the power unit doing it all for the first time, with so much still up in the air, a tried and tested manufacturer who got it right last time there was a regulation change, I think surely are going to be quicker out of the box, at least in 2026, than Audi. So I think that's the direction I would go in. I agree with you. I think he'd work very well with James Vowles. I think he'd work very well with Pat Fry, the technical director there. And I think he'd work well with Albon. And so in terms of the musical chairs, Toto Wolff also said that Kimi is our future. That's Kimi Antonelli. another significant quote that came out of Montreal. So it looks like Antonelli is going to get the nod at Mercedes. We're awaiting confirmation, of course, but everything he's doing in the 2-year-old car points towards him getting the seat there. And I think it's probably difficult time for Logan Sargent.
Particularly after the weekend that he had, making that mistake at the end there. I feel for him. It's a lot of pressure, isn't it? You know, when your boss is publicly saying that Carlos Sainz is his number one target.
And where are Kevin Magnussen, Valtteri Bottas, Zhou Guanyu? They're all the guys not sure about what the future holds. And we'll find out soon, but it must be very difficult times. And I think it's not a coincidence, probably, that Zhou has had 2 difficult weekends, actually, in Monaco and Montreal. I think as you're a young guy, you're only in your 3rd season of Formula One, you're desperate to stay. He's actually put in some really good performances alongside Bottas, particularly in the races, yet it's dropped off as the uncertainty over 2025 has grown.
He's had a bit of bad luck as well. He hasn't had the car to deliver those results. I think that must be the most frustrating thing for a driver, when you feel that you personally can bring it, but you don't have either the luck or the machinery to prove that. That must be tough.
Build up to Montreal was a lot of talk about the 2026 regulations. The chassis was what was being announced in the lead up to the race. The power unit regulations have been set for a couple of years now, but there's going to be a 300% increase in the amount of electrical power, and it's going to be a 50-50 split between the internal combustion engine and the electrical side. That's the power unit. On the chassis side, they're going to be smaller, they're going to be lighter, and they're going to generate their downforce in a different way to now. And we're talking about adjustable aerodynamics. The World Motorsport Council is hearing about the new regulations in detail this week in Uzbekistan, and then the final regulations will be set in stone from the end of June. Now, I caught up with the FIA's Single Seater Director, Nikolas Tombazis, while in Montreal. He's the guy overseeing the FIA's introduction of the new regulations, and he's actually my guest on this week's F1 Beyond the Grid. And here's an extract of what he said.
The aims are to make sure that we have close racing. It's important to have exciting racing and have cars that can follow each other very closely, and where the driver is still fighting for position with another driver. And we feel that that has deteriorated a bit recently on the current cars. Then there's quite a few other things we want to do. We do feel the current cars have a bit too much downforce. There's many corners that are no longer corners, they're flat out. We feel that we do need to have cars with a bit lower downforce, and for more places of the track to be what we call grip limited, to be basically corners. We are making a car that is compatible with the engine regulations, which are already approved about a couple of years ago. And these make a step towards sustainability. So we feel that is very important as a first step for Formula One. It's by no means the step. We still need to do more work there. So all of these factors have pushed us towards the current package of regulations.
Do you think it'll be a very competitive field straight out of the box? Do you think one team could end up stealing a march?
I don't know. Clearly my hope is that it will be very competitive out of the box. My hope is we'll have different teams winning and periods when they go up and down and so on. I think invariably with new rules there will be somebody who gets it wrong and who finds themselves in a rather embarrassing spot to start with. But I do think we're putting some things together to make sure it's more competitive in the long run.
Well, I think that this is another reason why I love our sport, because we never sit still. We're always searching for new, innovative opportunities to improve the racing. And I love the team's response to that, because it tells you all about the competitive order and the commitment to engineer something that achieves just that. I mean, I know that a lot of people aren't fans of DRS because they sort of always think of it as a bit gimmicky, but I love it. I do, actually. I love it when you see that a car gets within 1 second. You're just like, come on, what are we going to see here? And then you see a great overtake, and then you can, see another car come back. But I'm interested to see how this new short burst of additional battery power when within 1 second of the car in front comes into play. So will it do the same thing as DRS but just in a different way? But no, it's great. And the sport that never sits still.
Look, and for more detailed insight into those 2026 regs, you can listen to the full interview with Nikolas Tombazis on F1 Beyond the Grid via your podcast app and the official F1 YouTube channel from Wednesday this week. There's also more analysis and reaction on f1.com. So the top 10 look like this. Max Verstappen took win number 60, his third consecutive victory in Montreal. Lando Norris was second and George Russell was third. Hamilton took his best result of the year in fourth and Piastri was fifth. The two Aston Martins were sixth and seventh, Alonso ahead of Stroll. Ricciardo was eighth, with the two Alpines ninth and 10th, Gasly ahead of Ocon. In the Drivers' Championship, Max Verstappen stretched his lead over Charles Leclerc to 56 points. Lando Norris in third is now just 7 points behind Leclerc. Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez remain fourth and fifth, separated by just 1 point. Oscar Piastri is sixth on 81, coincidentally his race number. Then come George Russell 7th, Lewis Hamilton 8th, Fernando Alonso 9th, and Yuki Tsunoda 10th. In the Constructors' Championship, Red Bull have stretched their lead over Ferrari to 49 points. McLaren are third, just 40 points further back. And Mercedes are a very lonely fourth, 88 points behind McLaren and 66 points ahead of Aston Martin in fifth. VCarb are sixth on 28 points, and then it gets very tight. Haas are 7th on 7 points, Alpine are 8th on 5 points, and Williams are 9th on 2. Sauber are yet to score.
Before we go, I'd like to give a shout out to Haas, because when you go against the grain, every single other car is on the inters and you go full wets. You're probably thinking, this is a bit of a punt here. But those opening 10 laps were so thrilling to watch. Kevin and Nico carved through the field. I mean, he made up like 10 places in 4 laps, talking about Kev here. It was great to watch, and it was great to see them roll the dice in that way. And actually, it could have just about worked, but it seemed as if he was held a bit long on the pit stop, that perhaps had that pit stop been just a bit slicker, he might have come out in the top 10 and got into the points as a result. But I just love teams trying something a bit different. It didn't quite pay off, but it was worth the gamble.
And I think it says a lot about Ayo Komatsu's leadership, in that he is prepared to roll the dice. The guys were starting, 14th and 17th on the grid. There's going to be jeopardy. It's a wet Canadian Grand Prix. There might be a red flag. There'll probably certainly be a safety car at some point. Let's roll the dice, put extreme wets on when everyone else... If we start this race on inters, we're going to be 14th and 17th at the end of lap 1 and probably at the end of lap 2. So let's roll the dice. I completely agree. I love it. And I think it says a lot about Ayo. I'm a huge fan of what Komatsu is actually doing at Haas as well. Well, Pinks, does that mean that Kevin Magnussen or Nico Hülkenberg is your driver of the day? Or is what you said earlier in the pod about Max still standing?
I think I have to still stick with Max, and it isn't for the obvious reason that he won the race. It's the way he won the race. And I just think you're seeing a much more experienced, level-headed, mature racing driver here, that nothing really seems to faze him. And it's testament to both his and the team's application in those moments where things aren't quite going their way, to come out on top. And again, we've said it before, there to be that much of a difference between him and his teammate proves that it certainly wasn't an easy victory, but he still managed to secure it.
I agree. Max Verstappen has to be the driver of the day. I think if you're being cold-blooded about it and saying who did the best job, but mentioning dispatches for Lando Norris. I think this was a really significant race for Norris in that he overtook Max Verstappen on track. He dealt with very difficult conditions. Yes, okay, he made a couple of small errors, and the safety car thing, he'll be kicking himself about. But somehow, psychologically, this was a significant race for Norris in the way that he matched Max Verstappen, and I think that will help him going forward. So Max Verstappen, my driver of the day, but really great race for Norris as well. Well, Pinks, great to chat.
I thought you might ask me if I'm going to Barcelona.
Pinks, are you going to Barcelona?
Well, funny you should ask that. I was going to Barcelona, but I happened to chance upon 2 Taylor Swift tickets for me and my daughter. It is going to be her 8th birthday. I'm taking her to Tay-Tay. And big love and thanks to Simon Lazenby for swapping races with me so that I could do just that.
That's brilliant. Okay, whereabouts are you seeing her?
Wembley.
Pinks, which night?
21st, Friday the 21st, we will be there celebrating Willow's birthday with her all-time hero, Taylor Swift. And that does mean that I have to do Spa for like the 6th year running, and I'm just hoping that it's not drilling rain as it is every other time.
It will.
I don't mind. I don't mind. It's worth it.
If you see Taylor Swift in person, will you tell her to come to a Grand Prix with her boyfriend Travis Kelce, who was in Montreal again? Travis was in Miami. He came to Montreal as well. He's loving it, so...
Just a matter of time.
Well, Pigs, have a great time. And of course, we will be back on the show previewing the Spanish Grand Prix that Natalie Pinkham will not be at because she's at the Taylor Swift concert next Monday. But thank you, everybody, for listening. And of course, F1 Nation is produced by Formula One and Audio Boom Studio.